2022, aka Scream 5. I'm going to be calling it Scream 5 because that's what it is. Even though all the promo material, all the marketing say it's just Scream, it is Scream 5. It's the fifth installment in the franchise. It's not a reboot. It's not a remake. It's a sequel or a requel, which we'll get to. I will say, forewarning, this review will contain spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, definitely go watch it and then come back and check out the review. I will admit I'm very late to the Scream party. I was around 10, I believe, because the original Scream came out in 96, so I would have been 10 years old by that point. I was not interested in horror at all, and honestly haven't been until 2 or 3 years ago. It was after doing an episode of Nerd Cave Retro when we did a discussion on the original Halloween movies. We were talking about Scream, and I had mentioned I had never watched them. So both, my co-host Jason and Joey Image, who you heard on the top 5 movie sequels list, were both like, you've got to watch it. You've got to at least watch the original one. So that night, I watched it, and I fell in love with it, not really because it's a horror movie, but because of what type of horror movie it is. I love the self-awareness that the movie has. I do like a little bit of meta on occasion, I will admit that, but I thought it was done so well, and knowing what I knew about the horror genre, and I do remember watching the Nightmare on Elm Streets, the Friday the 13th, and seeing some of those 70s and 80s horror icons. Scream came along at a time that I felt the franchise, really the genre, I should say, needed to be a little reinvented. And Scream did a great job of that because of the self-awareness and explaining the rules of a horror movie and having that expert character that we have in all of them, including this one, that explain the rules to the cast and also to the audience. It's really smart the way that was done throughout this entire series, and I was really hoping that they would continue that with this movie. And this is the first Scream movie to not be directed by the great Wes Craven, who passed away in 2015. So I was curious as to how this movie would be made, and honestly how good it would be with not having him involved. But I can honestly say I think Wes Craven would be very proud. Like, I didn't know him personally or anything, but I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. And I'll be honest, minus the original, this is my favorite of the Scream franchise. If I were to rank them, I would say the original would be number 1. Then I would say this one, Scream 5. Then I would probably go Scream 2, followed very closely by 4, but though they're kind of neck and neck in my opinion, and then Scream 3 would be the bottom. This is the first Scream movie that I've seen in theaters, and from the very beginning I knew that it was going to be a good movie because you had the callback of being set up essentially and opening the same way that a lot of the other Scream movies have, but this one reminded me very much of the first one when Jenna Ortega's character Tara is on the phone and you hear that familiar voice, I'm not even going to try to mimic it because I can't do it, but do you like scary movies, and playing the scary movie trivia game was really cool, and the fact that it was the same voice was awesome, and I knew from then on that this was going to be a fun ride. And it was great to see Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, and David Arquette back as Sidney Prescott, Gale Weathers, and Dewey Riley, respectively. Though we don't see them until, I'd say, towards the middle of the movie, maybe towards the end of the first act is when we see Dewey for the first time. We really open with the new characters, which has been tradition with these modern sequel reboots of using legacy characters to introduce new ones. And we'll get into that in more detail in a bit, because there's a certain scene about halfway through the movie that I thoroughly loved, and it has to do with Star Wars, but we'll get into that. I actually really liked the new characters, especially Melissa Barrera's Sam Carpenter and Jenna Ortega's Tara Carpenter. They were the backbone of this movie, and I thought both of them delivered great performances. They were the new Sydney and Gale to me. They're related, but they fill that role as being the head and the centerpieces of this story, and why this new Ghostface has reappeared and started killing people that have connections to those involved with the original movie. So Tara is in the hospital, and what's funny is because she's the only opening victim of any Scream movie to survive, which I thought was a cool little twist. And it's there we're introduced to Sam and her boyfriend Richie, played by Jack Quaid. And there's an awesome twist with Sam that we find out. Like, she's in the break room of the hospital, and all of a sudden, in the reflection in the mirror, we see Billy Loomis, one of the original characters from the Scream movie, and he's talking with Sam, and it hit me, and it's revealed a few minutes later that she is the illegitimate daughter of Billy Loomis. And I thought that was just a borderline mind-blowing plot twist, and I just thought it was great to have that connection to the original story. There are connections to the other movies as well, so it's not like they didn't exist, but they really go back to basics when referencing the original and having some of the same beats, more references to that than the other ones, in my opinion. And that's because, going back to that self-awareness that I was talking about, there's a conversation with all of the new characters, plus Dewey, about the halfway point of the movie, where it's explained what a requel is, a reboot sequel, and they reference Stab 8, Stab being the fictionalized version of Scream that's, it's shown after Scream 1, where Stab was based off the events of Scream, more of that meta and kind of insider self-referencing deal that I thought was really cool throughout the series. That Stab 8 really departed from the formula, and a lot of fans hated it. And it was made by, as someone said, that Knives Out guy. And it took me everything to not just bust out laughing in the theater, because it was a knock on Rian Johnson, who directed Knives Out and also directed Star Wars The Last Jedi, the 8th movie in the Star Wars Skywalker saga, that was so controversial, and a lot of the hardcore fans hated it. They said it ruined their childhood, and that was even referenced in this movie. So I thought that was so freaking brilliant to do that. And talking about bringing in legacy characters and, making their mark and making an impact. And that's where we really kind of get, we're already in spoiler territory, but I was heartbroken when Dewey died. I really was. I had a feeling that at least one of the original characters had to die, and I think it made the most sense for it to be Dewey, because as we see, he and Gale weren't together anymore. Gale had moved to New York and she had her own morning show. Dewey was living in a trailer, and he had permanent nerve damage and a limp from all the times that he had been attacked by the various Ghostface over the years. He wasn't part of the sheriff's department anymore because he was asked to step down. I'm assuming because with his condition, he was a liability. So it was really heartbreaking to see that. But I also think if you had to kill one of them off, it made the most sense. But yeah, it was still kind of heartbreaking to see. And even that shot is Ghostface is about to make the final kill, and he says, "It's an honor," and then does the dual stab. And I'll say this too: there were some really cool deaths and like brutal stabbings in this movie. And Tara at the beginning, had the knife stabbed through her hand when she was trying to block it from Ghostface. But we get to the end of the movie, and it follows a similar pattern of the original, and it even takes place in the same house that the finale of the first movie took place in. We find out that Richie is one of the two killers, the other being Tara's friend, Amber. They're both obsessed with horror movies. They're obsessed with the events that happen in Woodsboro, and they meet online and they find they have a lot of the same ideas, so they want to make their own movie moment. And that's where, before they both die, they get into the discussion of toxic fandom, which really kind of hit home with me because I've seen that happen with a lot of fandoms throughout my life, mostly with Star Wars and the divisiveness of the Disney trilogy. And even, I'll throw pro wrestling in there too. That's something I've followed since the 90s, and it's become very divisive. I would say that those two have the worst fan bases. Nothing makes them happy if it's not exactly what they want. If they don't get what they want, then it's over. It's ruined. Hate it. Not giving it a chance at all. Not being open-minded or anything. But that's kind of going back to that self-reference that I was talking about and what made this movie really work. And I don't know if there will be a sixth Scream movie. Given its success at the box office, I know it's making around $35 million on opening weekend. It's very likely. I personally hope that we do get one. It may be a few years, but I like the Sam and Tara characters, so I think you could build off of something more. Where they would go, I don't know. I'm not well versed enough in the Scream universe to really theorize on what they could do with it, but I really enjoyed this movie. As I mentioned, it's my favorite since the original. Definitely go see it if you're a fan. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And I also will throw this out there. They give a nice little tribute at the end. It's very simple, but there's a line of text that comes up as the picture fades, and it just says "For Wes" in that classic screen credits font. And I thought it was simple. It was great. And I think Wes Craven would have been very proud of this movie. It's one of the better movies that I've seen in a while. I guess I can say it's my movie of the year so far, but we are very early into 2022. But I was thoroughly pleased. I thought the early buzz of positivity did it justice. I had pretty good expectations going into it. I thoroughly enjoyed it.